Hi, welcome to some ideas using 2.5 inch strips with GourmetQuilter. I'm SusanClaire, the Gourmet Quilter. There's more information on the website. If you're looking for things, we have a pattern available. If you're already signed up to receive the pattern, you will have something that looks a little bit like this, and that tells you all about the cutting and all sorts of other words, and I'm here just to show you how to do it. So what we're making this time is a fun little basket. Now it's kind of nearly square. It thinks it's square, but if you put handles on it and then do that, it's no longer square. But it could make a very nice sort of squarish little storage basket. There's just so many things it could do. However, we'll get started on making it. So what we need initially is some strips. Obviously we're doing things with strips. So we're going to sew our strip pieces, and I've done the lining in strips as well. So I've actually gone ahead and I've done all that because I'm quite sure you know how to sew strips together. We're using 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I've done my 6 for the outside in nice bright colours, and then there's actually 7 on the inside in the lining so that we've got a little bit of room to move. So I've done all that as well, and I've also done some quilting. So I've just quilted either side of the seam lines on the outside, and it's all sitting really nicely. So I should just mention about the batting. This is a bag batting, and it's quite firm. It's not very thick, but it's quite firm. So it just helps give it a little bit of sort of shape and things. So it's quite nice. I'm not sure what its proper name is. I'm sorry. It's a bag batting. So I'm going to go ahead now. I've done all the quilting. What we have to do now is trim, and I've actually just started. I've trimmed the 2 ends level, but we have to trim the sides as well, so that all to the front side, so that we're all ready to do the next thing. So we just want some nice straight edges, and then we're going to cut away a section in the middle, so that we can make that nice little base. And so we're binding the outside here. So inside everything is really tidy. There's no raw edges anywhere. It's just kind of cute and fun and clean and tidy. How's that? So in the pattern there's a piece that tells you about the cutout. So what we're wanting to do is find the center of this piece. So we're just going to fold it in half, and then on the little piece of pattern there's a little dotted line. So we want to position that dotted line on the fold, or you could open it out again having marked the fold. It's kind of up to you which way you go about that. And we just need to cut this away though, this little shape. It looks like it's square. It is not quite square, so don't be fooled by thinking it's a square, because it's not. So I'm just going to lay it on both sides, and I'm just going to draw it because I thought it might be easier to draw it. I'm going to use my scissors to cut it rather than a rotary cutter, because of cutting into that corner is not an easy idea with a rotary cutter. So I will cut it, but I could instead have marked my centre fold and then laid that piece on and drawn the whole piece, if you'd rather do that than cut through the batting double, because it is quite bulky. However, it's quite good, and some nice sharp scissors do the job quite nicely. So I'm just cutting on that line that I've drawn. Yes, you're cutting through some stitching, but that's all going to be okay. And then down here, so I'll do that on both sides. And we don't need those, so they can just go somewhere else for now. So now we have a fairly unusual shape here. However, it's going to be very helpful to be that shape. So what we're going to do now is bring the lining together, because there's no raw seams or anything inside. All the seams are stitched to the outside, and then we're going to be covering them. So in actual fact, this is the seam that looks a bit like a side seam here, but it's actually kind of front and back if we've got the handles over it there. So I'm going to go ahead now and stitch these 2 seams, this one and this one, just with a 1/4 inch. It can be a slightly generous 1/4 inch, but it's still basically a 1/4 inch seam allowance that we're using. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then we do need to press the seams open. So I might just do one at a time, because we can get the first seam bound whilst it's still open and a bit easier to get to. just that nice short seam there, and we just want to press that open. So it'll be a little bit fiddly, I guess, with that batting in there, and it may not want to sit particularly flat, but it will sit better if we do try and press it open at this stage. And so you've got to get it into that, what appears to be a corner but actually isn't. Looks like a corner, feels like a corner. It's not a corner. So I just want to get that as flat as I can reasonably get it. And then I'll turn it over and I'll press it again, hoping that that's going to flatten out fairly well. So we can do both sides to start with, although I did think it would be easier to get one done because then it gets a little bit tight when they're both done. So then we're going to put this piece of binding. So this is where I've got the black and white stripe here. So I'm using this dark grey on this one here. So we're just folding in the edges to the centre. So I just finger press the centre, fold the edges in, and then press it. But we don't fold it over again. We're just leaving it that wide. And we want to stitch this down either side, or holding that seam flat. And it works quite well. It's longer than the seam, so you can have it extending a little bit at each end. And where the two meet in the middle should sit where the seam is. So you can keep an eye on how straight it's going as you're sewing it. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky going into the corner, but we can do this. So if you turn it in that way, you've got somewhere for it to go. Right, so we're keeping that seam open flat. We're starting just a little bit above, and I'm just stitching either side of the binding, just near the fold. And you could pin it on first if you felt that you wanted to do that. You have to make sure that this is all sitting out flat, particularly when we do the second side, so that this goes down nice and straight. As I said, it's a bit longer than the seam, so we can trim off the excess later. It just gives us a little bit more room to move. And you probably can't see anything because it's probably all curling up. And now I'm just going to come back and I'm going to do the second side. That seam will now be encouraged to sit flat as long as we've pressed it flat, and keep holding it flat if you can whilst you're doing this sewing, so that it encourages it to stay that way. That on. So, and we can just give that another press. Again, that will just help that seam flatten down a bit more, and that's looking pretty good. So that's going to sit like that. We can trim these ends off, and now we need to do exactly the same thing on this side here. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll show you how I'm just getting into that tight corner, but I'll get the seam all done first. So I've gone ahead, I've drawn my seam, I've pressed it open, and I've started stitching the binding. I've done one side already. So really it's the same thing as we had here, it's just that we can't open anything out because this one's already closed. So it's just a matter of, if you have it inside out and sew into that bottom opening, it actually is, it probably looks worse than it is when you're actually doing it. It doesn't seem nearly so bad as when I'm just trying to hold it there. Just come down this second side. So you can access it to some degree from the lower end, which you can't see at the moment. And you could put a couple of pins across if you wanted to, but it's sitting quite well. And you just have to allow it to get itself into that little bottom space and just make sure that it's all sitting quite flat. And it's looking pretty good. You probably can't see it at all. So that's looking good. We can turn that out the right way so that we can see where we're at. So we've got that one there, and so when I was pressing that one, and I'll do it again now, because you can't kind of get at it easily, certainly not on a flat board like this, you can just bring it over a little bit and then press it again. And that's how I press the seam open as well. And the same thing obviously on this other side too. You can give that one a press again. So now we're doing really well. We've got our sides. We have got a couple of problems at the bottom here because we've got holes. However, we can trim off this excess of this binding now. We don't need that. And what we're going to do now is stitch these holes closed. So we're just going to open that out. So we're going to bring the seam to the center area there. Everything should just fit from when we cut out that shape. And we're going to sew right the way across here, again with our 1/4 inch, but we're going to bind it at the same time. So when I did this one, this is how I've done it. I've stitched it on with the seam and I've rolled it over, like a little bit like a quilt binding, but we have to also tuck the ends over as well. So I've got my 2 pieces of binding fabric here. I've just pressed them in half. It's just that folded in half. So I'm going to position that with this seam here. So I've just got that, as I said, that join is in the middle there. And we just want to line up all the raw edges and leave a little bit sticking out at each end, and then we're just going to take our 1/4 inch, or ever so slightly more than 1/4 inch, but not too much more, but the sort of generous 1/4 rather than the scant 1/4, leaving a little bit at each end because we just need to wrap that around afterwards. So we'll just sew this seam so that I can show you this one. Quite a thick seam. This batting is fairly substantial, although it's only thin, it's quite solid. So what we've got now is a binding flapping here and some ends sticking out here. So we don't want too much sticking out here. I might just trim that, just not too much, but just a fraction. We don't want it too long because it really will get in the way. And what I found that the easiest way to do is just slightly push that, the seam allowance bit up, but then we're just going to flip that around over the end of the seam, and by slightly pushing this end up, it causes this one to fold in just a little bit, so that when we bring that over to stitch that down, now you could hand stitch this down. I'm going to machine it, but you may prefer to hand stitch it. But I am going to put a pin in it at this end, and then I'm going to do the same thing at this end. So I'm going to trim off just a little bit. You want at least 1/2 inch to turn over, maybe somewhere between 5/8 is probably good, between 1/2 and 3/4. So just push that just a little bit at an angle up there, bring it around the end of your seam, but basically straight, but that causes this bit to come in then, and then you can flip that over and we're ready to sew. We could put another pin in just to hold it before I get to the sewing machine. And then I am going to machine across there. As I said, if you would prefer to hand sew that, that would be something that you could do. We're starting at the end. Just bringing that over nice and firm. And I'm going to be attacked by these pins again. And that's gone together really well, so I'll just do a little back stitch there. And that's sitting really well. So that's a nice little edge on that seam. It's all nice and tidy on the inside. There's nothing there, no raw edges or anything inside. So we just need to do exactly the same thing now on this other side. So I'll go ahead and do the other side because it is exactly the same process, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next. So I've gone ahead, I've done both those corners now, so we've got our little square bits. It helps it sit nicely that way. So now we need to make our little handles. So these, I've just put a little bit of batting in the handle. Other than that, we've made other handles a little bit like that, but I thought with a little bit of batting it just gave them a little bit more firmness on this one. So I've already cut some pieces here. You could do it with one long strip, but I cut two shorter strips. The same way we've been doing other loops and handles and things, pressing both the raw edges into the middle and then folding it over that way, except that this time we're going to position a piece of the batting, so it's only a narrow piece. And we can do both at the same time, which is why you could have done one long strip and then cut them, but we haven't. So I'm going to place them both in the batting in behind one of the folds, so basically lining it up with the centre fold of the strip, and we can sit them next to each other, as I said, and stitch them as one, and then we can cut them apart because they do need trimming a touch anyway. So that is really quite straightforward because that just fits in there nicely, and we can just give that a nice press, and then we're just going to stitch down either side to hold that nicely, and it makes a nice little firm handle. So I'll go ahead and I'll just stitch about 1/8 of an inch in each side all the way. So I've gone ahead, I've stitched my 2 lines of stitching. I'm just going to trim them now to the length so that they're ready to use. So they're both the same length, which is kind of a good thing when they're handles. And we might be glad of a couple of clips at this stage. So the other thing we can do also is trim off any of this excess binding at the top edge here, because we're going to be starting to work on this top edge now. So the handles get positioned either side basically of this seam that we've covered over here, and we have to place them on the inside. We're wanting them to stand up when we get there. So what we're going to be doing is binding that top edge so that the handles pop out at the top there. So we need to position them on the inside, and we can do a little holding stitch. So we can use a measurement, or we can just go perhaps level where the change of colour is there with that strip. There is a measurement to go between them, and it's about that sort of distance. Let's have a look. Yep, right on that sort of distance. So it's just as easy to line it up with where the strip, so the handle itself, whoops, is nearly lined up with that strip there. So we'll put the other one on this side, so lining up with this seam here, the outside edge of that handle. Works quite nicely. So make sure you're not twisting it when you do this, so it should come around. In fact, you can probably do it so that it almost folds a little bit. Just make sure you haven't twisted it. It's not good to have twisted handles, I've discovered. So, and I'm suggesting just a little holding stitch, maybe about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, so we've got those handles level with the edge. And we'll go along and just stitch them on so that they're held in place, but not as much as 1/4 of an inch away, because we don't want to risk seeing that little holding seam. So I can go ahead and do the other one, but before I do that, I'll show you how to get the next bit ready. So the next bit is getting the binding piece ready to go around the top as well. So we've got a strip of fabric. I've just pressed it in half at this stage. It's the same length as the distance around the top of the little basket. So what we need to do actually is sew the short ends together, and then we need to press it in half like that. It's easier to put a line of a fold line in before we sew it, because it's quite a long way to suddenly work out how to press it all the way around. So I'll just sew this short seam. press that little seam open. And then we want to fold this in half. So as I said, I've already done a fold line, and that will help hugely when we, and so have all the raw edges together. So just like a binding strip, perhaps if you normally fold your binding strips in half, but we've got it all joined up into a circle. Because the bag, even though it's sort of squarish, basically forms a sort of circle, a square circle. So I do need to stitch my other handle on, but then what we're going to do is position this again so the raw edges are even, and also inside. So I've got that one stitched, those handles stitched on, and we're just going to position this, and we can pin or clip that all the way around, and we just want to stitch that 1/4 inch seam all the way around the top there. So I might go ahead, I'm going to sew my handles in place, and I'll go ahead and I'll stitch that seam, and then I'll come and show you what we're going to do next. So I've come nearly all the way around. I'm just holding this down so hopefully you can see. So basically I've got the bag kind of sitting up like that, and I'm just rotating it round. So working on the inside. And I'm nearly, here we go, nearly back to where I started. So that's all looking pretty good. We've got our binding in there, we've got our handles. Now they're going to pop up, which is really good. So what we're going to be doing is, and it will be a little bit of a challenge in that the batting is in that seam, but we want to fold that seam down to the outside. So we'll give it a good press, and then we're going to do 2 lines of top stitching, because we've nearly finished. We're going to do 2 lines of top stitching. We need the seam to be at the top so that the handles can pop out at the right place. So I was going to do 2 lines of top stitching, one about 3/8 of an inch away to encase the seam, and then one near the fold of the binding. But I'm going to give it a bit of a press first to encourage that seam to go over. Such a cute little basket, this one. I thought they'd look really nice on a shelf, but first of course I need the shelf, so I'll have to work on a shelf. And then if you just need to grab whatever's in the basket, you've just got those little handles and you can carry it around with you. Work baskets, or if you're a knitter, they'd be probably quite good for storing balls of wool in them. They'd be quite good, I don't know, I can think of lots of things. Great basket and bag user. And all made out of 2.5 inch strips and a bit of batting. How amazing is that? So I think you've got the hang of how this is going now. I'm just about back where I started, I think, with the pressing. As I said, it needs just a little bit of encouragement, but if we do the 2 lines of sewing, and I've done that on this one, you can see here, it's a little bit more than 1/4 inch, and then I've come near the edge of the fold as well. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I'll show you when it's all finished. So I've nearly come around the first round, so I've actually chosen to do the 3/8 seam top stitch first rather than the edge, so that I've got it all sitting nice and flat, because it needs a little bit of encouragement, not too much. So I'm nearly back at the beginning here now. And then it'll be really easy to come around and do the next round. So I've got the bag inside out. These poor bags, they go in and out, in and out. And it's got a line of stitching all the way around, but it just needs one more line just on that edge now, and that'll be a bit easier because it's sitting where we want it to sit. So I'll go ahead now and show it to you when it's all finished. So I'm nearly round this second line of stitching, which means we're nearly done. That's that. Pretty good. This threads off here. Oh, that's all looking pretty good to me. So now we can have a bag that way around if you like. However, it sits really nicely if you turn it the right way out. So it's got a nice top edge, it's got nice little handles, it's got a nice base, it sits really nicely. It's great because you can carry it. You could have a whole shelf full of them, storing all sorts of good things. You can have one in each hand when you want to go somewhere. Who knows? I just thought that was a kind of fun little basket bag that's a little bit squarish, so that we can make so many things you can make out of these 2.5 inch strips. Who would have thought? It's just amazing. So that was idea number 18. We've only got a couple more of ideas to go. So I'll see you again with idea number 19.